So our next keynote speaker is from Redpulse. Jonathan Ha will introduce us to a new world of sharing economies. Welcome.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Jonathan Ha, and I'm the founder and CEO of Redpulse. So today, what I'm going to be speaking on is a new world of sharing economies using token economics. First off, what exactly is a sharing economy? The phrase has been so overused and loosely used that it's almost lost its meaning altogether. But when you think of the term sharing economy, you immediately think of ride-hailing services such as Uber, Lyft, and Didi in China. You also think of the ability of renting a short-term rental, perhaps someone's house, someone's apartment, really just at the touch of a button on your mobile phone. Very convenient. You also think of shared workspaces, so being able to plug into a desktop or a shared workspace in a very convenient and efficient manner, and also doing so alongside very like-minded people, which is of course WeWork, as you can see here. And what's really interesting is that I think by now you've had a sharing economy that's been built around nearly almost any product or service. And pretty interesting here as an example is the sharing economy of umbrellas, which didn't seem to work out too well. I think they lost all their umbrellas after a week. So it doesn't really work out all the time, but that's okay. People tried, and that's pretty interesting nonetheless. So getting to how do we define a sharing economy? So there's 6 different characteristics that I've identified, and this includes the aspect of being on demand. So having access to some product or service at the moment at which you need it or want it. Second, there being some degree of exchange of value, and whether that's value that you're being compensated for in the form of monetary value or maybe some other product or service, but there's some exchange that takes place. Third, scalability. So oftentimes with these internet-based platforms, having some ability to scale the platform in terms of both users and of course revenues is oftentimes a key component of sharing economies. Fourth, and this is very important, so this is one that I certainly do want to highlight a bit more, it's the activation of underutilized assets. Assets that oftentimes are sitting idle and not being fully utilized because they're oftentimes only owned by one person, owned and operated by one person. Oftentimes sharing economies helps to activate and use a lot of these idle assets to a much greater extent. Fifth, a peer-to-peer nature of the platform. So oftentimes having individuals providing some benefit, product or service to other individuals in a very direct manner, and oftentimes in a very decentralized manner. And finally, a sense of community. So a sense of belonging, also building value within the community, and also following similar ideas and values, really bringing people together. So taking a step back, the idea of sharing economies actually is not new. So if you go back generations, perhaps even thousands of years, back to when people lived in villages, perhaps villages with not more than 50 to 100 people, you already had a very active sense of sharing economy. Because back then, for example, people shared a water well. People shared knowledge. Knowledge and wisdom was given forth generation to generation, villager to villager. And as another example, these same villagers oftentimes shared protection, whether that protection was physical in terms of barriers and walls that were erected in order to protect them from outside forces, or that was just put simply the stronger people within the village that were willing to protect others that weren't as strong. So in a lot of these ways, the idea of sharing amongst the community is already very active and certainly is not new. Now, as the human population has scaled, and we've moved well beyond the idea of living in small villages of 50 to 100 people, and to this, we're now living in really metropolises of, over tens of millions of people, and oftentimes, you find living arrangements where, you have people that are literally living right next door to each other, but not really knowing who they are. And that's really, the sort of age that we live in today, where, we live in such a densely packed environment. Now the issue is, as you scale to a city of this size, a population of this size, people are less and less willing to share with each other, share common goods, common services, because you don't really know who these people are. You really don't even know necessarily your next door neighbor. Maybe you say hi to them every day, and you see them getting their mail, and you say hello as well, but you don't really know that person, and you certainly don't feel comfortable in sharing products and services and other goods with them. And the key driver of that is what we call the free rider problem. So what is the free rider problem? So if people cannot be prevented from enjoying a common good, individuals may avoid contributing or paying in the hopes that others will continue to pay. So this free rider problem prevents private organizations, for example, those that cannot levy a broad tax, from supplying public goods. Now you guys can probably think of another type of organization that is able to levy a broad tax, and that's of course the government, right? So the government is able to supply public goods, and it often does. They provide the parks, and they provide some degree of protection, of course, and this is all based upon levying a broad tax across the population. But in a lot of other cases, because there is no organization that is able to do so, a lot of these previously shared goods and services, they no longer are being actually shared. So we can actually apply these same 6 characteristics across many of these very well-known sharing economy platforms that we're very familiar with today. And I have a bunch of them just here on the slide here. And there's some interesting points to highlight. So if you first look at the idea of an on-demand sharing economy, you'll notice that for the most part, across the board, you still do have quite a lot of platforms today that still stick to this ideal of being on demand. There's 2 in particular that I wanted to highlight, WeWork and Wikipedia, that from the get-go did not plan to be on demand. WeWork, you actually need to buy into that service, subscribe into that service beforehand. You can't necessarily just show up one day and say, I want a desk. And for Wikipedia, that's also asynchronous in a sense that people are voluntarily sharing their knowledge and insights whenever it is convenient for them. And then hopefully, if you're looking for some knowledge, it's already there. And because it's scaled to such a great extent, more than likely, if you are looking for some general knowledge, Wikipedia has some degree of coverage of it, but it wasn't ever planned to be on demand. The idea of an exchange of value, now this one also is, for the most part, it's still very much retained by most of these platforms, save for Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is a completely free service, and there's also no compensation for those people that are contributing. The third item, which is scalability. Now, this is very important to most sharing economies, especially since a lot of these platforms became really successful based upon internet technology. And it's because they've been able to use the internet that they've then scaled up to such a great extent. And across the board, you see this is a key component that's still very, very heavily retained by most of these platforms, all of these platforms, I should say. Now, interestingly enough, the idea of utilization, this is a driving point as to why most of these sharing economies actually were popular when they first started. They played upon the idea that, guess what, you have all these products, you have all these goods and services that you've already paid for as an individual. You have a car, maybe 2 or 3 cars sitting in a garage. You have houses, you have apartments, you have even perhaps workspace that's not being fully utilized. Well, here's the idea of a sharing economy. You can then utilize these idle assets and be able to contribute something more to the economy, make it more efficient, and also do so for the greater good. For all those people out there that perhaps don't have a car, maybe they don't find it so convenient, or maybe they can't afford one, they all of a sudden can still get rides. They can get rides from people that do have cars. For people that are looking for just part-time work, and people that are looking for people that are able to provide this part-time work, they can provide it, and they can also receive it. But perhaps most interestingly, across all these platforms nowadays, the idea of the activation of idle assets no longer is front and center. So this is interesting. You're probably thinking, well, what about Uber and Lyft? It seems like you're still activating these idle assets by taking a ride from somebody else, who just so happens to have a car. Well, yes, perhaps, but something also to be to note is that Uber is also financing cars. So people that don't have a car but are interested in earning a salary, earning some degree of a wage from Uber, they are taking out loans, and Uber's helping them to do so, to buy new cars and put them on the road and be a part of Uber's network. So those are not idle assets. Those are new assets that were bought up just for this purpose. WeWork, for example, never started out as basically trying to activate idle assets. As a user of WeWork, in fact, WeWork themselves, they bought property, they bought workspace, and then leased it out to people on a short-term basis. So again, not really activating idle assets there either. Mobike and OFO, the examples go on. These bikes, they weren't there before. They have taken tens of millions of dollars of VC money to manufacture these bicycles that didn't exist before and put them onto the streets so that people can use them. So as you can see, the original idea of activating these idle assets really isn't in play for a lot of these platforms, and that's pretty interesting, and we'll get into a little bit more as to why that is and how we got to this situation. There are a few platforms that still do focus on this aspect of idle assets and activating them, and they include Upwork, Wikipedia, and eBay. Next, the peer-to-peer nature of sharing economies. It's also a bit of a mixed bag here. We have a couple that are still using them, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, Upwork, and eBay, but also quite a few that do not. And these include WeWork, Mobike, OFO, again, Wikipedia, and Lending Club. So again, a few examples as to why it's not peer-to-peer any longer. WeWork, I think the example is quite clear. This is a business, it's a platform that's actually providing space for individuals, so certainly not individuals to individuals. Same goes for Mobike and OFO. Lending Club started out as peer-to-peer, where individuals were lending money, perhaps in a large basis, then spreading out the risk, but it was still generally people to people. Well, nowadays, major financial institutions are actually looking to Lending Club as a means of loan origination. They're going there looking for higher yields because of the big data they've been able to glean from a lot of the user base and be able to split that out by tranches as to the credit score and risk profile of some of these loans. And so financial institutions have partnered with Lending Club, and Lending Club has been very happy to provide them with access to these loans. Again, this is no longer peer-to-peer. This is going back to the idea of incumbents, large corporations, large incumbents that are dominating the space. And last but certainly not least, the sense of community. The idea that a lot of these sharing economies bring together a group of people with similar ideals and a sense of belonging. Well, that may have been the story that was sold to a lot of people. That certainly isn't the case today. In fact, the only example of that still being true is, very interestingly enough, again, Wikipedia. And it's also worth noting that Wikipedia also is different from all these platforms in that they've never taken a single dollar of VC or PE financing. And for that reason, there may also be some differences between Wikipedia, how they operate, versus these other sharing economy platforms. So a couple of problems that I want to highlight. Now, before I jump into this, I don't want to characterize these 6 defining characteristics as that necessarily important or necessary in order to have a successful sharing economy. Sharing economies, there's so many different types of them today, and we really want to focus, I really want to focus on what makes a sharing economy actually useful to society. And that's some of the latter characteristics that I highlighted on the previous slide. One of them especially is the idea of activating those idle assets and the peer-to-peer decentralized nature of it. But the problems that we have currently, number one, includes the idea of a winner-take-all phenomenon that currently exists within oftentimes most of these internet businesses. And it's the idea that you're number one in your space or you're dead. There is no number 2, number 3, number 4, at least not in the long term. You could try to struggle for a while, but eventually that platform that has scale, that has been in the number 1 spot for quite some time, they take over. And just think of any internet company that comes to mind, and you can see that in action. So the idea of a winner-take-all phenomenon, it's driving the idea that in order to not just be successful, but to survive, you need to take VC financing. Because if you don't, your competitor will. And the competitor is going to take those tens of billions of dollars and scale much more quickly and across many more regions than you could ever do so without taking money, until eventually you're number 2 or you're number 3, right? And so the writing is very clear on the wall. In order to be successful or even have a chance at being successful, you got to take the money. And oftentimes it's VC money that you're taking. So the end result, unfortunately, is as you're taking this VC money, there are strings attached, very heavy strings attached. And it leads to a fixation on return on investment via more scaling, right? Scaling perhaps beyond what is necessarily even necessary for that platform at that point in time, perhaps even scaling beyond the original vision of that platform, often leading to the eschewing of many of those characteristics that I just mentioned, and it becomes very problematic. A second problem is that the idea of activation of underutilized assets being asset light, right? Everyone loves the idea of being asset light, not owning so much, but being able to use the same degree of benefit by utilizing these shared goods. That no longer applies. And if you recall from the previous slide, few, if any, of these platforms are actually asset light or allow us as customers and consumers to be asset light. Third, rather than being focused on building value within the community and the ecosystem, most of the value nowadays accrues to the platform itself. So this isn't necessarily a problem in itself, but the original pitch that we all received by these platforms is that, there's all these major incumbents in place, and they're unfair to the consumer. They've created the rules, and we want to disrupt. There's that word, right? Everyone wants to be disruptive. Everyone wants to be innovative, and they want to come, from a small player, David versus Goliath, and be able to knock down the big guy and create a new, fair system. Well, unfortunately, that's just a pitch. If you think about all the major sharing economy platforms nowadays, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, WeWork, they're the incumbents now. They have tens of billions of market cap, and they're the ones that are able to use their capital to be able to run into new markets, use their capital for regulatory arbitrage purposes, use their capital to hire lawyers and lobbyists. So the idea of them being these small upstarts, disruptive, innovative upstarts, that's really just a dream. It's really just a pitch that they continue to pitch to us, when in fact, they themselves have become the incumbents. And the value that accrues to those platforms is certainly not any value that accrues to people that use those platforms. Finally, as I mentioned before, these platforms, as they enjoy regulatory arbitrage, essentially not playing by the same rules as the previous incumbents played by, they further exacerbate the idea of a competitive market. And smaller upstarts that may in fact be even more so innovative or perhaps provide even more value through different business models, they can no longer compete. They haven't achieved scale, and others that have are going to stay in that incumbent position. So a lot of problems that have arose when we've allowed these sharing economy platforms, so to speak, to scale to the size they are today. So getting to the meat of the presentation, interesting summary of sharing economies, but what does this have to do with blockchain? What does this have to do with cryptocurrency? So a couple challenges that I've highlighted and some potential solutions to those problems. Not to say that tokens and cryptocurrency is a panacea for all of these challenges, but there's a few interesting ideas that could be applied to help move us towards the right direction. So the first problem of there being a tendency to take VC money, which then leads to a fixation on ROI and scaling. Well, of course, you can do a fundraising via a token sale instead. And that right now really levels the playing field because good ideas can still, based upon their merit, raise quite a lot of money very quickly. And of course, good ideas can raise money from VC and PE. But the thing is, those VC firms are gatekeepers in themselves. And there is, of course, a hierarchy, there is a dynamic to that, and you need to be able to play that game in order to get that funding. And that funding is highly competitive at the moment to get. And for the time being, for companies that have a very interesting idea and an innovative approach to existing problems in industries, they still have a very good chance of raising a good amount of money to be able to execute on that idea. And inflation, the aspect of inflation I'll get into in just a moment. Second problem, asset heavy rather than being asset light. Well, related to the token sale as well, you can reduce the priority on scaling and bring us back to the idea of having an asset light sharing economy. Third, value accruing to the platforms rather than to the individuals, to the participants. But with the idea of tokens, and tokens representing ownership of the protocol that's being developed, ownership of the ecosystem that's being developed, value then more readily accrues to the token holders rather than just purely to the platforms themselves. But this is caveated with the idea that you need to be able to create a very functional token economy. Creating the right economic framework and incentives is very important to actually being able to achieve this idea of value accruing to the token holders, and that's really not easy to do. Fourth challenge, as I mentioned, so with these new incumbents, they've taken all of this power, oftentimes regulatory arbitrage, in a lot of these key markets, and have created a very anti-competitive environment. Well, this is a to-be-determined aspect of token economics, but if we can create a regulatory framework that is more consistently applied within jurisdictions as well as across jurisdictions, then I think we have a much better chance of leveling the playing field, so to speak, and making it more competitive. So bringing us to a specific example, the knowledge industry. So the reason I bring this up is because Redpulse actually does implement many of the ideas that I've shared with you just now, the ideas of using a tokenized economy to create a new type of sharing economy. I do want to give the example of how are we doing so for the knowledge industry. But first, a few observations about knowledge information. So if you map out across 3 different axes, along the bottom, a spectrum between general knowledge and specialized knowledge on the left side, and then on the left axis, the number of interested consumers, and the right axis, the willingness to pay. Now, what we've noticed is that in terms of the number of interested consumers for general knowledge is of course quite high. Everyone wants to know, okay, what's the main point of today? What are the key points, key developments that I really need to know about? Because that's just the baseline. If I don't know that, then I don't have the basics down. So that's why for general knowledge there's such a high demand for it and very high number of interested consumers. Now, as you go out to the right, towards the long tail, of course, more specialized knowledge, there's fewer interested parties because it is that niche. How many people are really interested in how nuclear technology has developed in China over the last 6 months? It's an interesting topic, but there's just not as many people that are interested in how interest rates have changed in the last 6 months. So that describes the long tail there. Now, very interesting is on the right side, we can map out the willingness to pay versus general knowledge and specialized knowledge. And it's almost the exact opposite. In the case here, nowadays, most people, most financial institutions, most corporates, they're not willing to pay for general knowledge anymore. Banks, other corporates that are under budgetary pressure, they have their own internal research teams, and so much of that information covering general information, general markets, is already out there for free. Where everyone has access to blogs, there's Bloomberg, there's Thomson Reuters, there's Financial Times, the list goes on. And so people have now gone into the habit of getting all this information for free. Now, moving out to the right side, specialized knowledge, where you don't have as easy access to that kind of information, people actually are very willing to pay for that information. In fact, pay quite a lot for that information. So it's these two observations. Financial institutions and corporates are no longer willing to pay for general information. Number two, these same institutions are willing to pay for specialized, bespoke insights. So before I get into further the tokenized sharing economy, how this applies to Redpulse, which is the platform that I run. We started out as a more conventional research platform covering China, but as we started to think about the space and saw the observations that we made, number one, not interested in general information. Number two, they are interested in paying for specialized information. What we did was we created a tokenized platform that basically incentivizes people to contribute their ideas on markets and to do so using cryptocurrency, and to share that information on a free basis to the institutional clients. Now, as we have seen, the second observation that we made was these same institutions are willing to pay for custom bespoke insights. The second part of our business model is to then include the idea of custom research requests that can be requested by our network. And that really allows those same institutions to request the information that they truly do need and aren't able to find anywhere else. And that's generally the idea of what we're doing at Redpulse. And the overall idea of a sharing economy can be summed up like so. So you have participants, you also have common goods. And if you think back to the idea of a village where you had these participants initially, you had these common goods and services, people were very happy to participate, share, and benefit without any sort of transactional or incentives in place. As we scaled, and in the example from before, to tens of millions of people living in the same city, we then have the advent of fiat money that's being used to incentivize people. And so it became much more transactional. People were only willing to contribute to common goods if they were being compensated for it. And it lost a lot of the idea of sense of community, also as we saw just previously, the activation of idle assets, so on and so forth. Now, if we add a utility token layer in between fiat and common goods, this is where it gets more interesting because, as an example, people that are opting into this sort of economic framework, and this economic framework being then controlled not by a government, but by either a foundation or some other entity that has created this economic framework around this utility token. Well, one example of what you can do with this is you can create an inflation mechanism, essentially mint new tokens on a very small but continuous basis, but for a very good purpose. The minting of these new tokens is thus the source of capital that you can use to compensate those people that can contribute to the common good, and thereby eliminate the need on a very transactional, one-off basis to pay for that particular common good. It's really that tax that originally only a government could levy now a foundation, now a entity that has control and management over the utility token can levy that same tax. And in doing so, create a very fair system for people to be contributing. There are no freeloaders or free riders in this case, and thereby allowing everyone to enjoy those same goods again. So challenges and trends ahead. I'll go through this quickly, I know I'm out of time. Creation of a fair and transparent token economy framework is not easy to do. So you have to spend time being able to balance decentralized versus centralized. The reliance on automated, oftentimes imprecise reputational scoring systems is part of this as well, and that's intended to replace centralized authority. And again, this is not easy to do. Shifting crypto regulations, we all know how quickly things change in different markets and jurisdictions, very problematic. And finally, as a trend, not necessarily a challenge, incumbents and existing business models are pivoting towards token economies. There's no longer a couple kids with a white paper in a garage. These are real companies that have revenues and profits that are now looking at token economies, and this is certainly not a bad thing. So to conclude, I'd like to also present Redpulse as one great example of a sharing economy based on crypto currency, based on token economics. And what we're doing is creating a sharing economy for knowledge. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions, or do we need to move on to the next one? Okay, sure.
Yeah, sure, sir. So you bring up a very important thing. The village example is a bigger thing. We have to actually be more a value strong. And then if we have taken an incentive or a sustained compensation. So that curve will come in a few hundred years. What do you think the curve back to that village example is taken away?
I don't know for certain, but I think it's a great question. The curve back to the idea of more of a egalitarian benefit for all, I think is going to be much more rapid than the past several thousand years, and mainly because of technology. So you see how quickly these internet-based platforms have gone from zero to tens of billions of dollars in terms of market cap, and also huge impact on oftentimes billions of people. That happened in a matter of a decade or two, and I think we'll see something just as quick, if not quicker, come about from using blockchain.
Thank you.
Hi, could you share a little bit about what kind of people are willing to work with tokens?
Great question. Yeah, so typically they're people that already are familiar with cryptocurrencies, with tokens. And for us, because our clientele consists of financial institutions and corporates, that's one challenge, but also much more closer to your question, the people that are producing the content are oftentimes experienced professionals that have been in the industry for quite some time. And the business model that we're trying to focus on, that we're modeling our token economy on, is a conventional expert network. So you may have heard of GLG, Third Bridge, Alpha Sites, and these are very big businesses and very lucrative business models. And they've been able to leverage these massive networks of experts, academics, people that are practitioners in these fields, to act as experts that are then hired on an hourly basis by these hedge funds. But these experts, they could be 40, 50, 60 years old. They've been working for a while, and they don't necessarily know what cryptocurrencies are. And if they do know what they are, they may not necessarily be interested in using them. So it's a big challenge. But we do have a solution to that. We've partnered with a platform called NEX, which is a decentralized payment gateway and exchange. And they're essentially allowing us to install a widget in our platform that allows for more seamless fiat to crypto, crypto to fiat exchange without either user demographic having to touch crypto. So that's pretty interesting for us. Okay, no other questions. Thank you so much for listening to my talk.